Hey, welcome everyone. So exciting to see how many of you have joined us today. Welcome to those who've been joining this series and to new folks who've just joined us today. Really excited to have you here. So my name is Sonali Patel. I'm Vice President of Partnerships at Think of Us. We're a research and design lab that was created to address complex challenges within the foster care system. And we really approach our work by trying to ask questions, listen, take the collective experience of thousands of people and turn that into data and insights. And we work with leaders like all of you across the entire sector and people with lived experience to co-design new solutions. And then we do whatever it takes to implement those solutions and work with colleagues along the way. For today's session, we really want to anchor around anticipating and meeting the needs of kin to minimize their overwhelm in the transition and improve the stability of placement and supports. So with kin placements, we know there isn't always the gift of extended planning or preparation, yet we know we still want to have great outcomes for children and families. And so as we get started here, what I really want to do is ground us with a quote from the field. So we had the privilege of engaging kin caregivers in New Hampshire, and I want to share a quote from a kin caregiver that was vulnerable and shared their experience with us. So they said, "We didn't have a social security card for 10 months. They kept saying that his birth mother had to do that and that we can't change that unless we adopt. We got the social security number by bugging the social worker until they cared. The child welfare agency should have given us a Medicaid number for him under their department. They didn't have that. We need the parent because we don't have the cards, but mom lost custody and the hospitals still don't know what to do. It took 3 months to get any cash assistance, and we're trying to raise an infant who also has severe health needs because his mother was using drugs while pregnant. Neither me or my girlfriend have any experience raising kids, and we were just given this infant one day. It's been so hard with no help, and no one seems to care." And with that, I want to appreciate that each of you have shown up to really help unpack what is possible so that parents don't feel this way, so that kin caregivers don't have to feel this way and they have the supports that are needed. And with that, we're excited to be able to collaborate with the Harvard Kennedy School Government Performance Lab today for this final webinar of this June series. At the end of this session, it's our hope that you'll feel equipped with strategies that you can take back to your agencies and to your counties. And with that, I want to introduce Linda, Maria, Emma, and Shireen from the GPL, who'll share more about the outcomes for today's webinar.
Thanks so much, Sonali, for that framing and quote to ground us in today's conversation. And good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Blancato. I'm a director of our Child and Family Wellbeing Initiatives here at the Government Performance Lab. Today, I'm joining you from Raleigh, North Carolina. And as Sonali mentioned, I'm joined by 3 of my colleagues who also lead our team's work with jurisdictions to strengthen kin first practices. Emma, Maria, and Shireen, could you say a quick hello too?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emma Craig, and I'm a project leader at the GPL, and I am based in Charleston, South Carolina. I'll pass it to you, Shireen.
Hi, good morning. My name is Shireen. Actually, I am a fellow at the GPL based in Jersey City, New Jersey. I'll pass it to Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Harker, and I am a fellow for GPL based in DC, and I see some folks from San Diego County. We've been working in a project to prioritize kin first there, so I'm happy to see all of you here.
Thank you. Today's call will be focusing on strategies for offering proactive supports to kin caregivers and hoping to offer you all some ideas, tools, and resources to support you in your county's journey as you're working to strengthen supports for kin. This is the last of 4 workshops on the next slide that we've been leading this month for the state of California. It's really wonderful to see some familiar faces in the room. But if you have missed any of the prior sessions, they're all being recorded and will be uploaded on the Center for Excellence website. You can also find all of the tools that we've discussed in each of these sessions linked on our website, and Sharon is dropping a link in the chat now. During today's call, you can expect for us to kick off with an introduction to our team's work and why we're so focused on kinship care. And as always, we're hoping that this session will feel really practical to the work that you're doing and will leave you with some new ideas that you can be bringing to your team as you're working to strengthen supports for caregivers. Together, we'll talk about some of the needs that can come up for kin, right, who are often taking placement with little time to plan or prepare, and discuss some of the scenarios that you may be encountering in your work. We'll close out by sharing a few resources and templates that you can take and adapt in your own work. On the next slide, I'll share a little bit about who we are at the GPL and our work around kinship care. We are an applied research organization based within Harvard's Kennedy School, and our team is spread throughout the country, working with state and local agencies to build more just and effective service systems for their communities. Our team's work is really hands-on, really implementation focused. We work alongside state and county teams as they're seeking to strengthen their kin first practices in their day-to-day work. We really like to get in the weeds and understand what's working, where might there be opportunities to be strengthening practices alongside your teams, develop and test new approaches, learning along the way what works, and sustaining and scaling those practices. A big part of our team's work is focused on strengthening referral systems and service arrays. We recognize that often there are supports and resources out there, but they can be really hard to access. We're often thinking about how can we be addressing some of those access barriers that families may be facing, or build warm handoffs to strengthen connections to those supports. So as part of today's conversation, we'll be sharing a few tools that we've worked with jurisdictions to implement as they were seeking to strengthen supports for kin caregivers, particularly early on in a new placement, but often recognizing that there are limitations that they're facing, resource constraints, staff capacity constraints as part of that. Before we dive into today's topic, I also want to share a little bit about why this work is so important to our team and to the agencies that we're working with. At the GPL, we really believe in the importance of prioritizing kinship care and have worked with child welfare leaders and frontline staff in jurisdictions around the country who believe in and see these benefits of kinship care through their own practice and support of families. Shireen is going to drop a couple quotes in the chat from staff that we worked with to remind us why kinship care can make such a difference in the life of a child. At the top of this slide, we've listed some of the potential benefits of placing children with kin, right? Thinking about reducing trauma that kids experience, contributing to better mental health outcomes, and greater placement stability. And when we talk about building a kin first culture within our systems, we're not just talking about finding that one relative to take placement, right? But thinking about all of the ways that kin and nephrons can remain involved in a child's and a caregiver's life during this tough time, either through providing respite, transportation, childcare, even a weekly phone call, right, to be that supportive listening ear and support for a child. We know that prioritizing kinship care and maintaining connections to kin can preserve what we believe belongs to every child, their family, their culture, their community. Yet, even when we see that kin can provide all of these benefits for children, they're often doing so receiving less support, less time to prepare, or supports that may not be tailored to their unique needs given this moment. And so today we'll be talking about some strategies to help anticipate and better support the unique needs that kin caregivers have to set those placements up for success. I'll hand it over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Linda. So we know that kinship caregivers are often tapped for placement quickly and rarely have the benefit, or as Sonali said earlier, the gift of significant planning or preparation time. Yes, this means that they often have less time to prepare their homes for children, but also gives them less time to prepare mentally and emotionally for the many demands of caregiving. And the right supports offered at the right times can strengthen placements and help caregivers feel less overwhelmed, something that most folks are undoubtedly experiencing from day one in their new caregiver role. So the list on this slide shares some of the top challenges we and the jurisdictions we've worked with often see when supporting kin caregivers. I suspect that this list may resonate with many of you, and you may have some additional challenges that you've seen and supported while working with and supporting a kin family. So as I name a few of these, I invite you to also drop an example of what you see to be a top need to caregivers, or that feels particularly unique to kin caregivers in the chat. So there's, of course, the financial burden that's associated with caregiving, as well as a significant loss of leisure and personal time. Fictive kin may have never cared for children full-time before. Older kin caregivers probably thought they were done doing so. And we often see a need for support around generational differences for these older caregivers, things like navigating technology with kids, to tutoring supports, navigating newer school policies they haven't encountered before. Plus, there could be interpersonal challenges managing relationships with the parents of children in their care. Kin caregivers also often need support navigating various new challenges and the complex logistics of involvement with potentially multiple new systems at one time or subsequently. Think about the child protection system, public benefits, the criminal justice system, behavioral health, maybe legal systems, just so many different moving pieces that they could need help navigating. I'm trying to take a glance in the chat too to see if you all have added some additional pieces. Yes. Okay, Lillian, I see you added childcare, a huge one, and one that varies greatly in terms of how we're able to offer that support based on jurisdiction. Jess, thank you for sharing this. As a caregiver, yes, seeing how much training non-kin is given, and you did not receive that same support. That is the most powerful testimony that there is in terms of why this is so important. Also, yes, all those different moving pieces around family dynamics, thinking about gatherings, traditions, group events, how to honor those pieces, also how to think about them differently depending on managing tricky relationships or change in relationships. These are some great examples. Thank you all for sharing these. Please continue to share these in the chat if you're still typing or another one comes to mind. Your comments are just really further driving home how unique the experience of a kin caregiver can be and why we see proactive kin caregiver supports to be a key ingredient for building a kin first culture across any agency, across any county. When both staff and agency leadership take the time to better understand the unique concerns of kinship foster care, they can help their agencies create policies and practices that are responsive to those needs. So today, we will walk through an interactive activity together that prompts us to consider those unique needs a little bit deeper, the needs of a new kin caregiver from multiple perspectives. And first and foremost, we'll be putting ourselves in the shoes of a new kin caregiver. I'll turn things over to Shireen to get us started.
Thanks. All right, so to bring these considerations to life, we're going to do an exercise together. I'd like you to put yourselves in the shoes of a new caregiver who is about to accept a new placement. So we're going to break out into groups for about 10 minutes. Please take a couple of minutes to quickly read through the 3 provided scenarios, which we will drop into the chat. And then once you're in your breakout groups, choose the one that feels right to you to discuss, and then we will want you to spend the bulk of your time together answering the following questions that are up on the side. Gonna answer, how are you feeling as this new caregiver? What is coming up for you emotionally? What are you thinking about as you prepare to foster this child? What challenges do you anticipate coming up as a new caregiver? What support would you need what support would you need? And, to think about getting ready and while fostering. What challenges might the child or children experience in this transition? Will they need any specific items, any specific types of care due to the reasons that they came into care? Who and where would you turn for support? Your caseworker, other family members, friends, community resources. These documents are also in the document with the scenarios. We are going to come together as a group to discuss your responses. All right. Thank you for participating in that. Let's debrief. How did that go? We can start with question one, that question of how are you feeling in the shoes of this new caregiver? Does anyone want to share with us what your group was talking about there?
I'm happy to share. It's possibly a lot of fear, a lot of unknown. Who knows what the future will look like? How does this affect my family, um, like internally and outside? Um, yeah, and just a lot of fear.
Anyone else? How are you feeling as this caregiver? Or also what challenges, and with this, actually, with this one, if you can maybe say what scenario you were discussing, what challenges were you seeing coming up as the caregiver? Potential challenges or potential supports that you were going to need in order to be able to do this work.
We were in scenario 2, so we were the single middle school teacher, and we agreed to take the 16-year-old who has cognitive disabilities. I think ours was possibly like a time constraint because we're full-time English teacher. Likely she goes to a different school. Some of the challenges were that we mentioned were at what grade level or what age is she functioning? What kind of supports does she already have in place? And then also, if possibly the social worker could reach out to the family members or whoever else was a part of this child's life to maybe help in some of the transportation or getting the child to services. The other part of this was also just the supervision piece of it. If she's 16, does she have the cognitive ability of maybe say a 5-year-old? What does that look like? Making sure that our house or our apartment is safe for the child, and there's no danger in the house, and fitting for instance, like I was saying, somebody was saying, like, if you're in an apartment, I was saying, well, if we only had like a 2-bedroom and one of the bedrooms was maybe a den, making sure that changing the bedroom out to make sure that she had her own bedroom. And then are we financially secure enough? And if not, what resources would be afforded to me as a resource parents to care for this child?
So there's lifestyle changes and challenges in terms of now you have to get a child to school, get a child home from school. There's the supervisory aspects that are not just that this is a teenager, but also that this maybe is a teenager with cognitive disabilities that may mean something about their in-home functioning. And also if you had your single income with your household and you were doing just fine, are you still able to manage that now in a 2-person household? Sure. Did anyone do one of the other scenarios? What are some of the challenges that you saw there?
Our group did scenario 1, and folks brought up some good points just about like the living situation and what things have looked like in their counties. And we talked about like the generational differences of being an older person raising younger kids. Janet had mentioned some situations that are going to come up, having a 6-month-old and a 3-month-old and what that might look like based on housing. And then I don't have names in front of me, so I apologize to the other member of our group from LA County who is talking about, you know, programs that they have available, like for parents in those situations who might be forced to change their living situation in order to accept placements, and what that might look like and what those financial costs are. And then Hader was mentioning some resources that are available. They have like parenting coaches, right? And the difference is just in logistics for people raising kids now versus, you know, someone who the last time that you parented was 30 years ago, 20 years ago, just in like cost and availability and what it looks like to go from working full time and looking forward to retirement to pushing forward into the situation with your grandkids. So just the wraparound challenges of your own lifestyle shift, as well as the emotional and financial responsibilities, and just like having to give up, you know, your plan for rest to wake up and change diapers. And we were still in the middle of conversations about what that might look like when we got pulled back in. So
Yeah, but absolutely right. Like this grandmother had just made some decisions for their life that was about to be about maybe relaxing a little bit, and now this is a completely different shift. This person is not working, which may also mean that they're not eligible for childcare for these 2 young children. I think that's going to be probably a pretty big lifestyle shift, in addition to, you mentioned, right, like maybe you have to move in order to be able to have a home that is ready to accept these children. Last question to think about here. We were thinking about like where would you turn to for support for these needs that are coming up? Veronica, I see a hand up, and maybe that was for the other question, but wonder if you have an idea here.
So it was for the other question, and I think I was just processing right now and looking at all of the scenarios. I think a major challenge that sometimes our relatives do face is just kind of understanding the role. Like once they get placement, they have so many different individuals that call it, right? They have the child's attorney, they have the CASAs, they have the service providers. And like, I think the challenge would be like, just what is my role really in all of this? What can I do? What can I not do? Who do I communicate with? Who do I get approval from? So a challenge would be just kind of really identifying my role and who are the team players in all of this.
Yeah, you're highlighting a really good point, right? Like this is not just simply taking a child in and parenting them. You are now co-parenting with a lot of different systems. You have a lot of different people that you are responsible to answer to, and that you need to coordinate things with, which is a challenge in and of itself. Those people may be supports to you, right? Like the CASA and the legal team and your caseworker. And maybe they don't necessarily feel like supports. Maybe they do just feel like part of the checklist of things that have changed in your life. Yeah. Any other final shares before we transition to the next part of our activity? All right, so let's change gears a little bit. We're going to repeat this exercise, but now we're going to do this from the perspective of the caseworker on this case. So keep your same scenario. We're going to send you back into the same groups to discuss. Dropping the link to the instructions document, your questions, in the chat now. You'll have 8 minutes in this group. You've read the scenario, so now this is just thinking about how do I meet these, answer these questions and think about meeting these needs from this different perspective. All right. All right, thank you all. I hope you had a good discussion. What felt different in this role? Sorry, my screen just changed. What felt different though, moving into this role as the caseworker? Were you still able to hold the considerations of the caregiver in mind? Was this discussion easier to have because you just had this conversation about thinking about what did this caregiver need?
I think this discussion was a little easier to process for me. Um, I had suggested that we provide a teaming approach where management is involved, where potential team members that support the youth are involved, as well as the caregiver, to kind of create a mapping process of what is needed. I think oftentimes workers are left and put in a position where they have to do all the thinking. They have to be responsible for all the services, and they have to be responsible for thinking about the what ifs. What if this doesn't work? Who is this caregiver supposed to call? And all of the brunt of the work of managing the case is put on the worker. So I had suggested in the CFT process, that's where the teaming should be. That's where the supervisors and maybe some managers need to think outside of the box, because there are going to be outside of the box events that will occur with a special needs child in a caregiver's home that has never cared for this level of acuity before. So I just thought that, really letting the whole team share some of the wealth of this instead of putting it on the primary worker's shoulders, because that's how burnout happens. And if she's burnt out, she can't help the caregiver, nor can she support the child.
That's a good point, right? That the caseworker is like synonymous like with case manager, and sometimes that means like they're supposed to figure out every piece, but maybe everybody would feel a little bit better if they all work together to figure out what are those needs and what are those supports, or who's going to help in what spaces and places. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And to just piggyback one other thing, to also lean into the regional center. Okay. So this child has cognitive delays and he has already been approved as a regional center client. How can they come in and step in and provide additional supports and interventions for not only the worker, but also the caregiver? Leaning into the team, and not letting one person share the wealth of the worry and the anxiety.
Thank you.
Hi, I couldn't find my little hand button to raise my hand, but I'll just jump in. We talked in our group, a little bit about the frustrations of finding, the support. Is oftentimes we can get build that support team within the community, depending on the family, and how connected they are to the community. We definitely want to draw all that in, because those are the pieces that are going to be in place to support when we're not there. However, I feel like one thing that we're really lacking is the mental health support for the kid. And so this is what I talked about a lot in our group was how a foster parent doesn't necessarily have as much skin in the game as a kin does. It's so much more painful and traumatic and mentally wearing on a relative to see their own family member either succeeding or failing, right, at reunification. How much more that comes with its own added trauma, and you're passing that on to the kids, and the whole family is experiencing it like builds, right? Like it snowballs into an avalanche versus where if it's just a foster parent, yeah, they may be sad that this kid can't go home because the parent's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but they don't necessarily have any skin in the game. So I would really, really like to see, and then Amanda from Stanislaus said, yeah, and we want to we can refer them, right? We can refer them to a therapist, but then they call and it's a 6-month waiting list. So then they're sitting there and I said, that's a great point, Amanda. Like it always takes forever to get the services. Yet we want you to take these kids today and we want you to deal with this family. By the time you get to the 6 months, there's all kinds of stuff happening. For us, we like to try to keep in touch with our placements within the first month. We call them every week, ask them questions to make sure that we can kind of head things off, because oftentimes people will just call and say, I can't do this anymore, come get the kids. Right? We don't ever want to get to that point. That's traumatic for everybody. And so we do gradual check-ins each week for that first month just to make sure everything's okay. And sometimes it still falls through the cracks, but at least I think it helps a lot. I don't know if any of the other counties do that, but it really helps us as far as maintaining placements to head those things off as they come up.
That's a really important point, right? That there are ways to find as a caseworker that you can find supports for families in the community. You need those supports also to be like readily available, accessible, and like ready to take on the role of supporting. And that's not always the case. And so sometimes that can be a really hard position as a caseworker, but having those regular touch points can be helpful. All right, thank you all for participating in that and sharing with us. I will now pass it over to Emma, who's going to discuss some tools and resources that you can use as you continue to consider how best to support kinship caregivers.
Yes, thank you all so much. And thank you, Shireen. I think your participation in this activity really highlighted how every kin placement is a different story, a different experience, and therefore supports can and should be tailored to what that experience entails and the unique needs that come about or come along with it. And so we want to share a couple of resources that we've seen other jurisdictions develop to set their staff up to really think about how to be more proactive in supporting kin caregivers, thinking about how to meet them where they are. And Janet, I have to say what you shared is an excellent transition for us, as we'll be sharing some resources that really hit on some of those strategies. And it sounds like you are thinking about some of these pieces as well. So hopefully these resources might be a helpful fit or consideration to add into what you're already doing. And the first that we want to share on the next slide is a kin caregiver resource guide. With any new parenting journey, there are needs that come up as kin caregivers open their homes for the first time, many of which we just discussed or went through together. And since we know that getting started as a new caregiver is a really busy time, a really overwhelming time, this guide really focuses on getting them started immediately and accessing supports that are often needed from day one. So we worked with a larger county where case management staff repeatedly saw new kin caregivers struggling with knowing where to begin accessing benefits and supports. And managers realized that not all of the staff or their staff could readily provide all the details about available resources. And most of their existing materials were much more geared towards new traditional resource families, kind of what Jess shared earlier about some of those discrepancies existing between traditional resource and then what's being shared or designed for supporting kin. And in this example, as a result, they were often sharing descriptions of resources for new kin caregivers, but having to do things like, mark out part of the flyers, maybe write in different phone numbers, different things, maybe changing benefit amounts to voice over to show those differences. Otherwise, a new caregiver might be left without accurate information or maybe no information at all. So everyone agreed that it was time for a new resource guide that was specifically for kin caregivers, and that would be really helpful. And in doing so, really took the time to focus on designing a resource that doesn't just list all potential resources, right? That can be one really long list. Doesn't give you a clear place to start. It can feel hard to navigate. So instead, they designed this guide to serve as a tool for new kin caregivers to use to help them get started in assessing and prioritizing their own needs. So we're going to drop a link right now to a template version of this resource guide, which I encourage you all to open up and scroll through while I highlight some pieces of this design quickly. So since the focus of the entire guide was to help new caregivers become aware of options without overwhelming them, the guide is limited to 2 pages. That's what staff try to keep it to, prioritizing the most common needs and supports for new caregivers to get started. And that list comes after a section that lists questions designed to help new caregivers start thinking about their immediate needs and other logistical considerations that might be new to them in this role, normalizing that it is okay that they don't have it all figured out from day one. These are prompts to help them get started. And you'll also see that the 4 sections of the questions match the categories for supports, right? So a prompt to think about, what do you need? How can we support you? All right, let's match it or pair it up with what we have to offer. And this was designed to empower new caregivers to start with their prompts on their own. But we also thought, this is a way to be a really helpful conversation starter or prompt for a new caseworker to make sure they're checking in with new caregivers about these different pieces. The team members who use this find this really helpful. Of course, the best version of this is getting to use it in a way where you're facilitating those conversations, you're helping folks getting started, and then able to actually, in practice, support them accessing those supports, right? Taking that next step together. I'm going to end there for the sake of time and jump to the next guide or the next resource at the end. If there's any questions, or if you have questions about the resource, please drop them in the chat and we'll answer you there. If we look at this next example, this highlights a tool to implement a process checkpoint that ensures that staff are following up with new kin caregivers about a month into placement. So to Janet's point earlier, in terms of, thinking we want to keep checking in with folks week after week, see what's going on. Needs can change. Maybe we don't actually know fully what we need at the beginning. There's a lot that's happening in those first 30 days of placement. It's a critical time. And without the right supports in place, placements could end up breaking down later if we're not meeting folks' needs when we can earlier. So with all the moving pieces, both caregivers getting settled and figuring out new logistics, and then also caseworkers working in terms of conducting assessments, finishing up paperwork, making referrals, there's a lot that can happen. There's a lot that can slip through the cracks. So as a result, by the end of the first month, there might be needs that come up that caregivers didn't anticipate, or maybe they've talked about, but they haven't been able to fully pursue or follow up on. And so in one jurisdiction that we've worked with, we developed this protocol specifically around initiating a 30-day follow-up call with every kin caregiver following initial placement. And this group really wanted to put a structure in place to more systematically check in on caregivers early on. In looking at this, they're thinking about helping them access both the supports that they're entitled to from the get-go, also plus other resources or things that might come up as they need. And we're dropping the link to the same resource, to this resource that you can access as well to look at an example of one of these call scripts and plans to see how it worked in practice and think about adapting some pieces for yourself. A couple things that I want to highlight very quickly here is that in doing this, someone not involved directly with the case contacted the caregiver. So that could be a supervisor, another support staff like a service navigator, maybe a CQI analyst. The idea was that having one person managing outreach simplified things for their team. It also facilitated an opportunity for caregivers to give feedback about the supports they're receiving from their caseworkers thus far. Staff was provided training, and generally these calls took maybe somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes. It varied on what the caregivers wanted to talk about. And sometimes that was, a very direct follow-up questions about accessing supports. Sometimes that was just interest in wanting to, be able to share, and if there was someone who could give a lending ear. And some of these questions or prompts are very specific to make sure that caregivers know about all the things that they can access that maybe they were told on day one, but that was a lot on day one. So now they're being offered that once again to keep checking in with them and keep following up. And like I said, you've got links to templates to both of these resources. We encourage you to look at these, consider how they might be adaptable or something that you could use or incorporate in their own. Things like this was a 30-day call. Folks also found this version is great to do at the 6-month mark as well. So just different considerations to take in while you're thinking about how you can use these tools. As I just gave you a quick run through, I'm going to pass things over to Linda to wrap us up and encourage you to keep dropping questions in the chat if you have them.
Thanks, everyone. I will just very quickly close us out. Thank you all so much for joining us today and throughout this month. I really appreciated your engagement and reflections during our discussion today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We welcome your feedback on these sessions and would be glad to continue discussing the work that you all are doing. I'll close with just a quick reminder that all of the tools that we've discussed today and throughout this series are available on our website. And I've also dropped the link to sign up for our newsletter if you'd like to stay up to date on future resources and tools that we release or upcoming public learning sessions. We'll stay on if folks have questions, but thanks everyone so much and take care.